Welcome to KSOK Uncensored. Tonight's guest is Michael Wilkerson. Michael is a strategic advisor, investor, and founder of Stonewall.com. Also, the author of Why America Matters. Come on in, Michael, and welcome to KSOK Uncensored.
Kristen, great to be with you. Good to see you.
Oh, you as well. And I'm excited to have you on. While prepping for your interview, I put together a potpourri of questions because the cool thing with you is I can ask you questions all across, really what's going on in the United States, not just with economics, but policies in general. So I have a lot for you today, and I hope you don't mind jumping around, but I'm sure you can handle it.
Let's do it.
All right. Okay, let's start with what we see happening right now. Just today, we see that there were over 1,000 flights grounded. And when I look at the FAA and the Department of Transportation's budgets for 2023, again, this is a budget increase request that I've read through. It shows a lot about really what we're seeing with these woke companies, where they are wanting to put money aside towards ensuring there's inclusivity, ensuring there's diversity with staffing. But when we see a major breakdown like what we saw today, and they're blaming it on technical issues around the IT realm, and I don't see any of this budget put towards improving the IT department or that area of what that goes into. What are your thoughts on what is happening with these two government entities?
Well, I think it's symptomatic of a much broader issue. I write in my book, Why America Matters, that among four crises, one of them is what I call the crisis of institutions, which is at a very broad level, our federal government is failing us. And it's happening in different ways across the different organizations. You mentioned the FAA. We could go line by line through a number of these things. What is troubling not only is the fact that they're failing, but that they're failing with so much money behind them. Think about just in December, the passage of this omnibus spending package that allocated an aggregate $1.7 trillion across a number of agencies. And of course, as you point out, a lot of it is not going towards the basic needs as much as towards an agenda, a woke agenda, a radicalized agenda that has very little to do with the underlying service delivery that we need and expect from our government that our government is not delivering to us. I can give you,
Right.
Probably the biggest and most obvious example is military spending, where that 1.7 trillion we're spending, I believe it's $858 billion on defense. And yet we're at a strange point in time when morale in the military is very low, when the armed services are having a hard time finding able-bodied recruits willing and able to serve in our nation's military. And we're seeing the same kind of woke ideology go on. What's even more fundamental is just the procurement, corruption, waste, and spending money to build planes that won't fly or ships that won't launch them, when we're spending 10 times, more money than the next 10 countries around the world combined, 3 times more than China. You have to ask, where is all the money going? And I'm afraid it's not going in the right places.
Right. No, you're spot on. It's not. Do you see these companies that have gone woke? I mean, that's the vast majority of them. Do you see them walking back their wokeness anytime soon?
I think it's happening, and I think what's going on is a tension. Corporate boards, corporate leaders are stuck because they're getting hit on both sides. I think they swung way too far towards the woke agenda, as you said, and I think there's been a lot of fear in those boardrooms and in corporate leadership around being called out by the radicalized left. But at some point, they realize that they've gone too far. And even the ESG agenda, we're getting significant pushback in boardrooms because it just doesn't make any sense, some of the demands that are being made and asked for. So yeah, I think we're seeing the pendulum begin to swing back a little bit. Whether it moves enough, I don't know.
Right. Yeah, it's gone far. And we are seeing, for instance, Disney, I believe the CEO that really went woke. got fired. And so they replaced them. And then we're seeing Victoria's Secret failing. So, and those are some of the companies that were really pushing this woke agenda. So I agree with you. I am starting to see a trend in the more normalcy direction. It's going to take a while, though, in my opinion, to really undo all of the harm that's been done. I think of that in a lot of ways across the United States, even just with crime. I won't go off in that direction, but it takes a while to undo the harm that's been done. Would you agree with that from a business standpoint?
Oh, I absolutely do. I think this has not been something that's sprung up overnight. This has been years, if not decades, in the making of catering to more extreme agendas, more extreme ideologies, and I think it's a real problem, and it's hurt these companies over the long run. There's also been this conflicting loyalty about where do our loyalties belong. We talk about companies that their obligation is first to their shareholders and to customers and everyone else. But in the last, I would say, at least a decade, there's been an increasing pressure, especially for corporations that were trying to do business in or with China, to conform to the CCP demands for what they said and how they said it. We've seen lots of examples of this over time. I don't know this tension is going to be resolved easily because these are conflicting and incompatible loyalties and obligations. So I think we're going to continue to see issues and difficulty for these companies in resolving it.
Yeah, I agree with you. I want to jump to something. I've put a few videos out on this recently, and I know you are well versed in the energy market, but I want to just bring up a few things that people have been seeing, and that is the fact that we hear the Obama administration is looking to not go yank your gas stove out of your home, but to stop production on gas stoves. And so understanding that 40% of U.S. residences have a gas stove. Why do you think that, and this is just one example, why do you think that there is this massive push away from natural resources and this push towards electricity, electric vehicles? They want to pull wood fireplaces out of your homes and gas-powered fireplaces out of your homes. And they want everything to be electric, but the grid, there's no way the grid can handle it. Why do you think there is such a push to go towards electric?
Well, first of all, the shortage of bad ideas, there seems to be none. That's the one thing there is no shortage of right now. Bad ideas seem to be running free and available to anyone on an equal opportunity basis. Let's go away from the gas stoves issue because I think that one is a terrible idea that will never really see the light of day. It's popped up from some, the bowels of some bureaucracy, but as a practical matter, there's just no way that it can happen. Commercial restaurants, commercial kitchens need gas to be able to prepare food appropriately. The issue should be let's work on better ventilation systems in homes that don't have it. That's the cause of the problems that they're trying to address. The broader issue is what you've described, which is this maniacal push towards a green energy utopia. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with finding better ways to have cleaner energy. Absolutely, we should be pushing for that. But it is the headlong rush into a future that doesn't exist, that is not capable of existing. No government on earth is powerful enough to make the sun shine at night or the wind blow at will by executive order. It's just not realistic. And as it turns out, the dirty little secret is that many of these technologies, whether it's wind, whether it's solar, whether it is rechargeable batteries, these all have a massive environmental costs that are being ignored in their production and creation of batteries, for example, or in solar panels or otherwise. So it is an ideological push, not based on science, not based on reason or rationality. And like a lot of things recently, the ideological fight is dominated without people really being concerned about the underlying reality, the underlying costs to our environment and to our economy that are not being measured, not being included.
I agree. And understanding that the cost of natural gas has gone up and now we're pushing towards electric, do you think that is by design in a way of forcing folks in that direction?
We have to keep in mind that electricity always comes from something else. And that something else is either going to be natural gas, could be nuclear, could be hydro, but geography determines what technology you can use. The western part of the U.S. can rely on hydro because we've got massive, rivers, mountains that are pushing them down, etc. But one size does not fit all. What's been an embarrassment, I think, let's take Europe as an example. Western Europe made a decision to go towards this green utopian future, again, headlong, without considering the consequences of the alternatives. Germany, which had one of the largest, most efficient, and cleanest coal industries in the world, basically started to decommission their coal capabilities in exchange for Russian gas. Well, that made no sense at all, and they're finally now seeing the folly of that. Similarly, France, which has world-class nuclear capability, clean energy, relatively inexpensive electricity as a result, also under the former president Francois Hollande, started to de-emphasize and decommission nuclear facilities. It got so bad that last summer, when there was a heat wave in Europe, out of 56 nuclear facilities, sites, less than half were working or functioning. Others were under repair or in a process of being decommissioned, and that's why you saw rolling blackouts across a lot of the country in the hottest times of the year. So these are just examples of where being driven by ideology and not by science and technology that actually exists, as opposed to existing in science fiction, how they can lead entire nations down terrible paths. And we're seeing that now. And unfortunately, it's not something that can be reversed overnight. It's going to take those countries years to restore and rebuild their traditional sources of energy and the strength that they had in those respective technologies.
Right. Well, it's a lot to take in. And for folks that don't think about this and talk about this and study this regularly, it's a real eye-opener. And I just feel like I like having folks that can talk about, like yourself, who can talk about things like this on the show, because what these last 2 years have done for the United States and for myself as well is really opened my eyes to what was happening. And unfortunately, the way it was done with everything that went down in 2020, we were just really forced to wake up overnight. But it's really amazing. Once you realize what's happening, you're drinking from a fire hose, but it feels so good to be awake and at least even just begin to understand what is truly happening behind the curtains. So I appreciate you breaking that down for us. Something else I would love for you to break down, because we hear a lot of people throwing.
Can I just make one comment on what you just said, if I may, because it was so good that, one of the things that left me quite excited in my book, Why America Matters, and actually optimistic, was realizing that in spite of all the terrible things that have gone on in the last few years, that process of uncovering, discovering, awakening, revealing, and most recent example is, of course, the Twitter files, that is the necessary first step to change. That we have to have transparency, we have to have people being aware of what's really going on. Only with that can we start to take the steps that are necessary to hold people to account, for accountability. Transparency breeds that. So I'm encouraged by what you just said, and by the fact that we are in this period where more and more is being revealed about some of the things going on. Sorry to interrupt, but I thought that was an important point to make.
I'm so glad you did. Because that is, I really, I started speaking out again. I mentioned earlier before we started recording, I was in banking leadership for 20 years. And when everything in 2020, June of 2020, I'm here in Portland, Oregon, things really started going awry here. And it was like, boom, all my priorities changed. And I realized I needed to start getting the truth out there and fighting for this country and for what we're about. So I appreciate you stopping and taking that minute to reflect on that. We are going to go to commercial. We will be back very shortly. Stay tuned.
I was asking God through prayer, seeking a good news source. I believe He showed me the Epic Times. I deliver the mail and came across an issue. The front page intrigued me and I subscribed. Now I cut out articles and give them to friends and family. I leave old issues at the library and around my community. We read it to our kids and love the positive messages in each article. So why do I think everyone should read the Epic Times? Because they're bringing back traditional values to this great country.
We're back. All right, I want to pivot into really what's happening with our economy. And so I know that right now, the United States as a whole, we are seeing a depletion in individual savings accounts. We're seeing uh, the credit card balances increase. What are your thoughts on what is happening? What is this saying as far as our economy is concerned?
Well, it's saying two things. One, it's revealing that inflation really is pinching people's wallets. Or the value of their money is going down. You commented on rising credit card balances. We're also at the early stages of seeing delinquencies start to move up, both in credit cards and autos. That's obviously a bad warning signal for the market. I argue that we have not seen the end of inflation yet, but for the American consumer, even with slightly lower inflation at 7%, we've had that now for 2 years in a row, over a little bit over 7, compounded as 14, 15% value loss, purchasing power loss over just 2 years from 2020. Americans are feeling that, especially those who live paycheck to paycheck. That's why you're seeing these credit card balances go up and savings accounts start to be depleted. Bad warning sign. The other sign that I see right now is around a possible recession in 2023. If you look at what's going on in the housing markets, which are also forward-looking indicators that things are not great, home builder confidence is at a multi-year low. Home sales are at a low, as are new home starts. So all of these are not good indicators. Now, of course, part of this has to do with rising interest rates. We've seen roughly 4% increase in the cost of mortgages over the last year or so. For a typical house, the median home sale price is about $400,000 in the U.S. That 4% can equate to an additional $16,000 per year. So for a median household making $75,000, $80,000, that's a lot. That's a huge jump, and I think that's home affordability is a big issue. But it's also housing is sending a signal about the broader economy. We've seen a big rise in layoffs, especially in the tech sector, where over the last 12, 13 months since the beginning of 2022, there have been over 160,000 layoffs in the tech sector. I think if you start to see that moving into other sectors in the economy, that's your indication that things are getting worse.
Right. I agree. I want to go back to, I was going to ask you about globalism, because really when I think about folks that are tuning into this, and we hear Dan Crenshaw, for example, be called a globalist. And what is globalism? Can you break that down for the layman?
Well, globalism is this idea that countries, nations don't really matter, that we should have open borders, we should have open flow of labor and capital, and decisions really should be made on not on a nationalistic basis, on the basis of what's important to one country, but what's good for the world. Well, the problem with this, of course, is there are always going to be winners and losers in this. And what we've seen in this battle in the U.S. has been an attempt to undermine the sovereignty of our own nation with open borders, meaning mass illegal immigration. That's hurting the working class and the middle class more than anyone else. There's studies that have been done on this that show that the net effect of all of the sort of free trade of the last couple of decades and open borders, the result has been, yes, a real benefit to immigrants from poorer countries, but a net loss to the working and middle class in both the U.S. and Europe. And I think we're starting to come to realize that there are consequences to globalism that extend well beyond, the purported benefits.
I agree. Let's think about, for people watching, the World Economic Forum. If anyone's listened to Klaus Schwab and his ideals, he thinks China is just this holy grail of how a country should be ran. Meanwhile, very few people even understand what they are doing to the Uyghurs within China. And so it's wild to think that we have the World Economic Forum that is really driving force of globalism, and that so many people on the left actually revere this. What are your thoughts on the current administration and the World Economic Forum's influence?
Yeah, so these ideas run completely counter to the ideas that made America great and what makes it exceptional. So I wrote in Why America Matters that, among other things, there are, let's say, talk about three things that made this country what it is. One, the first, was this idea that we had God-given, unalienable rights that could not be taken away by any sovereign, by any government, by any corporation, by any bureaucracy. Why? Because they were given by God. The idea that all men were created equal, that there were inherent rights to life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. These are ideas that are being challenged today. The idea of the rule of law, that no one, kings, princes, were above the law, that everyone was subject to the same idea, the same principles. America was unique because of the idea of we the people, the idea that the people were sovereign. So going back to what you just described, the antithesis of that is what the WEF and the Chinese Communist Party, and even, it appears, the Biden administration seem to believe, which is they don't believe that the people are sovereign. They believe that decisions ought to be made by this elite group of technocrats who know what's best for the rest of us. And essentially, it's an attempt at a return to feudalism, where the lord of the manor, now on a global scale, has all the power, all the decisions, that tells everyone else what to do. This is completely inconsistent with the U.S.'s founding ideals. And by the way, this is why China is so hostile to the U.S., not just its economy and its power, military power around the world, but to the very ideals that made this country what it is, because they cannot tolerate a world in which the people are sovereign. It undermines their power, and they're doing everything they can to make sure that doesn't happen by exporting those ideologies to our country.
Yes, it is. And, really, when we think about the U.S. Constitution, recent studies show that only 20 to 25% of adults in the United States even understand the Constitution. And that's down from 30 years ago, it was 60%. And so we're going in the wrong direction. And there's very little, if any, teaching in the school system. And I like to call it government school instead of public school.
Mm-hmm.
In the government school systems, there's very little teaching of the U.S. Constitution, if any. And I'm gravely concerned about our youth, because those are future voters. Not only am I concerned about them just as because they're youth and we need to protect them, but as future voters, that is scary. What are your thoughts on how do we engage this 18 to 35 year voter, and then also in schools?
Very important issue. So I mentioned earlier in my book, Why America Matters, 4 crises. One of them was the crisis of institutions. We talked about that. The other one is the crisis of identity. And you've nailed it, which is, the younger in age cohort you go, the looser the views are on what really matters for identity in this nation. People don't understand the history. They don't respect the ideals such as democracy. Does it matter? Does it matter that we have free markets? Maybe socialism is a better way to go than capitalism. There's so much confusion among the younger age cohorts. And the reason for that is pretty clear, which is someone from my generation, we were taught these things in school. We may have forgotten them along the way, or we may have been confused by the propaganda around it in the last 30, 40 years. For a 20-year-old today, they're not being taught it. They're not getting courses in American history or in American civics in particular. And so, having said that, one of the reasons why I do remain optimistic is during the pandemic, everything that went on opened the eyes of parents across the country to appreciate and realize what was actually going on in the country, in their educational system, in their public schools, with their children. And that probably more than anything woke people up. Parents just said, hold on, these are my children. You're not going to indoctrinate them with these crazy ideologies. I think the reason that you're here, the reason that I'm here, is because we realize that we have a new generation that has to have the opportunity to hear the truth and appreciate the robust history of this nation. Far from perfect. It's been not perfect because we've not always lived up to the ideals. The ideals were fantastic, and they're still relevant today. And we need to translate them for a 21st century audience, for the 21st century challenges that we face. But nonetheless, these ideas of the freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom of assembly, freedom to be free from surveillance, all of these things still matter. And by the way, America still matters because it matters not only for us, but for the rest of the free world, the rest of people around the globe who are looking to America to provide some hope that there is a better way than what they've lived in. And that's why I love recent immigrants to this country are some of the most patriotic defenders of the values of America, and those who are most, they remind the rest of us of the dangers of communism and the world in which they grew up.
Right. Yes, they do. I have Vietnamese neighbors, and I would say the majority of the area I live in is, 40%, I believe, Vietnamese. So it's really wild. They are some of the most patriotic. They love Trump. They love the United States. I mean, we can really talk shop. So, and they really appreciate being here. So a lot of people don't realize that, but that is true. I wanted to touch on, we only have 2.5 minutes left, but I know in your book, you talk about the importance of religion, in the United States and in the home, and really the breakdown that we've seen. Can you, again, we're short on time, 2 minutes, so can you talk to us about why religion is so important?
Yeah, and I start by saying the same kind of loosening of views that's happening elsewhere is happening in religion, that we're now at a place where many, especially younger generations, don't believe it matters, don't believe that it's important. You go back to our founding, and we don't have a lot of time to go into this, but it is very clear that in pre-colonial and colonial times, the times that our country came together, religion played a dominant role, and a much greater role than it did at the same time in Europe. That's why you see a lot of foreign observers like de Tocqueville, Dickens, others commenting on, wow, look at the importance of religion in daily life in the U.S. And even for our founding fathers, while some of them were Christians or believers, some of them were not, they all recognized that in order to have a democracy, or a republican democracy, the form of government that we have, religion was essential. Without religion, you couldn't have morality. Without morality, you couldn't have either truth or trust. Without truth and trust, we would not be able to hold this together. And it was the fact that Americans did believe, by and large, they were moral, by and large, they were truthful, by and large, were essential ingredients to make the country successful. A lot of those things are under attack and being challenged right now, and that's part of the tension that you're seeing. So yes, I advocate that, among other things, we need a restoration of those core views and ideals that matter.
Amen. No pun intended. But thank you so much, Michael Wilkerson, a wealth of knowledge. Can you point people in your direction? I know you have 2 websites, one specifically for the book and one for Stormwall.
Yeah, thank you. So for information on Why America Matters, the book, you can go to whyamericamatters.com. That should be easy to remember, whyamericamatters.com. And you can go to stormwall.com to get insights into all of my writings, all my videos, information on publishing on third-party outlets, media outlets, and other YouTube and other recordings. So whyamericamatters.com, stormwall.com. Come check it out.
Love it. Thank you so much for coming on KSOK Uncensored. I can't wait to read your entire book, cover to cover. That's my challenge for myself this year. Read books, cover to cover. All right. Thank you again. You have a wonderful evening, and we'll talk to you soon. And thank you for tuning in, everybody. We will see you next Thursday on KSOK Uncensored.